The smell of cedar and sawdust has been the perfume of my entire life. It's the smell of sweat, of splinters, and of pride. I was standing in the middle of my workshop, the one I built from the ground up, next to what I considered my masterpiece, a grandfather clock, carved from a single, magnificent piece of black walnut. 6 months of my life were in that clock. My son Ethan looked impressed, but his wife Madison circled it like a shark. She didn't see the hand-joined seams or the intricate carvings. She saw an obstacle. She ran one perfectly manicured nail down its polished surface, a sound that was like a scratch on my own heart. Then she turned to Ethan, ignoring me completely. "It's a lovely hobby," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of sweetness that curdles milk. "But can we talk about something that has actual ROI? We have a deadline." Hobby. My life's work. The business that paid for my son's college education. The craft that saved our family. Reduced to a hobby. In that moment, something inside me went silent and cold. My hands, the ones that could shape wood into art, suddenly felt like they belonged to a stranger. But that single poisonous word wasn't the cause of the break. It was just the final crack in a foundation that had been crumbling under the weight of secrets and greed for years. To understand how we got there, to that moment of breathtaking disrespect, you need to understand the sacrifices I made to give my son a life I never had. And for 35 years, I thought I had. I thought my sacrifice had paid off every time I looked at my son Ethan. He had the college degree I never got, the smooth, uncalloused hands I'd never had, and a life that didn't smell of sawdust and varnish. I believed I had successfully traded my dream for his reality. That belief was the bedrock of my world, the foundation I'd built my entire life on, and it was about to be systematically demolished, starting with a Sunday pot roast. Sunday dinner was a ritual in my house. It was an American institution, as sacred as Thanksgiving, just with less fanfare and more leftovers. The smell of slow-cooked beef and onions filled the air, mingling with the scent of the lemon polish I used on the dining table, the first real piece of furniture I ever bought. Ethan and his wife Madison were there, along with my younger brother Gary. It all felt so normal, so comfortable, the calm before the ambush. We were halfway through the meal when Ethan placed his fork down with a deliberate quiet that got everyone's attention. He had that look on his face, a mask of gentle concern he'd perfected over the years. "Mom," he began, his voice soft, "we need to talk about something. It's just, we're a little worried about you." I felt a slight tightening in my chest. Worried? About what? The roast is a little dry, but I wouldn't call it a crisis. He didn't smile. "It's not the roast, Mom. It's about what happened on Tuesday, when you called me in a panic because you couldn't find your car keys." I remembered. A frantic 10 minutes of searching before I found them in my other coat pocket. A minor, everyday frustration. "Ethan, everyone misplaces their keys." I know, he said, holding up his hands placatingly. "But that, combined with a few other things, it's starting to form a pattern." Madison chimed in, dabbing her mouth with a napkin. Her voice was even smoother than Ethan's. "And you forgot our lunch on Friday, Eleanor." I waited at the olive branch for almost an hour. I froze, my mind racing. A lunch? I had no memory of a lunch. My calendar was my Bible. I never missed appointments. "Madison, I don't think we ever confirmed that." "Oh, honey, we did," she said, her tone dripping with pity. She reached across the table, picked up the knife next to my plate, and began cutting my meat into small, neat squares. "Here, let me get that for you. Don't want you to struggle." The condescension was so thick I could have sliced it. I looked at my hands, resting on the table. These were not the hands of a struggling woman. They were strong, marked with the nicks and calluses of a lifetime of hard work. These were the hands that had given up the delicate charcoal sticks and soft brushes of an art scholarship to Pratt. They'd learned to tame splintering oak and stubborn maple. These hands built a business from the ground up, put food on this very table, and paid for the expensive suit Ethan was now wearing. And here was his wife, cutting my food as if I were a toddler. I placed my silver fork down on the plate. The small, sharp clink was the only sound in the room, and it was the only protest I had left. Then came the final, devastating blow. My brother Gary, who I had practically raised after our father's accident, sighed heavily. "He's right, Elle. I've seen it too, down at the shop." My head snapped towards him. "What are you talking about?" "That order for the Henderson project," he said, avoiding my eyes. "You ordered cherry instead of walnut. It was a $5,000 mistake. I caught it just in time, but you've never done that before." His words hit me harder than Madison's insult. My work, my craft, was an extension of me. It was the one area of my life where I was unimpeachable. The idea that I was becoming incompetent there was terrifying. For a dizzying moment, I felt the ground shift beneath me. Were they right? Was I slipping? Was this what the beginning of the end felt like? My mind was a whirlwind of doubt and fear. I looked around the table at their three faces, a united front of loving concern, and I felt utterly and completely alone. I tried to anchor myself to a fact, a memory. The Henderson order? I remembered double-checking it. I was sure it was right. But his certainty, his feigned disappointment, it shook me. I pulled myself together, my voice quieter than I wanted. "I appreciate the concern, all of you, but I am perfectly fine." The rest of the dinner passed in a strained silence. They had delivered their message. The seed of doubt had been planted, not just in their minds, but in mine. Later, as I was clearing the dishes in the kitchen, I could hear them talking softly in the front hall as they put on their coats. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the old house had a way of carrying sounds. I paused, my hands submerged in the warm, soapy water, and strained to listen. It was Madison's voice, a conspiratorial whisper, sharp and clear. That went perfectly. She's completely rattled. Then Ethan's voice, lower, more urgent. "She's buying it. A few more episodes like this and Dr. Miller will have everything he needs for the assessment." The water in the sink suddenly felt ice cold. My breath caught in my throat. Assessment. Dr. Miller. Episodes. These weren't the words of concerned children. These were the words of predators. This wasn't an intervention. It was an indoctrination. It was the first coordinated tactical strike in a war I didn't even know I was fighting. They weren't worried I was losing my mind. They were trying to convince me and everyone else that I already had. I stood there at the sink long after they were gone, the water turning ice cold around my wrists. My son's words, "Dr. Miller will have everything he needs for the assessment," echoed in the empty kitchen, replaying in a loop. It wasn't a warning. It was a promise. The shock was a physical thing, a deep, cellular chill that had nothing to do with the water. It was the cold, hard clarity of truth. They weren't just disrespecting me, they were erasing me. And in that moment, I knew I needed to remember who I was before I became their mother, before I became the owner of Vance Cabinetry, before my hands learned the language of wood and steel. I needed to find the ghost of the girl they were trying to bury. I dried my hands on a dish towel, the rough cotton a familiar comfort. Then, moved by an impulse I hadn't felt in decades, I walked to the narrow door in the back hallway and pulled the cord. The wooden stairs unfolded from the ceiling with a groan, like an old man waking from a long sleep. The attic. I hadn't been up there in at least 10 years. Each step creaked under my weight, a protest against the intrusion. At the top, I pulled another string, and a single bare bulb flickered to life, illuminating a world of dust and ghosts. The air was thick with the smell of old paper, cedar from my grandmother's hope chest, and time itself. I navigated past stacks of holiday decorations, boxes of Ethan's old-school projects, and towers of photo albums I always meant to organize. In the far corner, huddled under the slanted roof, was a large shapeless form covered by a heavy canvas tarp, the kind they use on the back of flatbed trucks. It was stiff with age. I grabbed a corner, and with a grunt, pulled it back. The cloud of dust it released made me cough, but as it settled, my past came into view. And there she was, the girl I used to be. Leaning against the wall were a dozen canvases, their colors still vibrant despite the gloom. Portraits, landscapes, still lifes. My fingers, now calloused and mapped with the fine white lines of old scars, trembled as they hovered over a self-portrait. In the painting, a girl of 19 stared back at me. Her eyes were fierce with a kind of hope I could no longer recognize. Her hands, so different from mine now, were delicate, stained with flecks of charcoal and Prussian blue. One hand held a paintbrush like a conductor's baton. She was the architect of a future that had never been built. Touching the rough surface of the canvas was like opening a floodgate. The memory, so long dammed up, came rushing back. I'm 19 again. I'm sitting on my childhood bed, and the afternoon sun is streaming through the window, making the dust motes dance. In my hands is a thick, cream-colored envelope with the seal of the Pratt Institute embossed in the corner. My heart is a hummingbird in my chest. I'd worked my entire life for this. Every weekend spent in art class instead of at the movies, Every night spent sketching until my fingers cramped. The letter inside was the key to a different universe. Dear Miss Vance, it read, on behalf of the admissions committee, we are pleased to offer you a full 4-year scholarship to the Pratt Institute School of Art. Full scholarship, New York City, a life where my hands would create beauty, not just function. The world cracked open, and for one perfect sun-drenched afternoon, I saw my entire future laid out before me, a brilliant landscape of my own making. The phone rang 2 days later. It was my mother, her voice thin and ragged from the hospital waiting room. My father had fallen from a ladder at the workshop. He was alive, but his back was broken in 2 places. He would never walk again, let alone stand at a workbench. The business, already struggling, was on the verge of bankruptcy. The stack of bills on the kitchen table seemed to grow taller every day. My brother Gary was only 15, still a kid. There was no one else. That night, I sat at that same kitchen table. On my left was the Pratt acceptance letter, a glossy brochure of the New York campus fanned out beside it. It was a portal to my dream. On my right was the workshop's ledger, a book full of red ink and angry-looking numbers, and a greasy invoice from the lumberyard stamped past due. It was the anchor of my reality. I looked at my hands, the hands that had just been accepted to one of the best art schools in the country, the hands that dreamed of mixing oils and stretching canvas. I picked up the Pratt letter, feeling the weight of the paper, the promise it held. Then I looked at the ledger. I saw my father's face, pale and defeated in that hospital bed. I saw my mother's worry-etched brow. I saw my little brother's scared eyes. My dream was for me. Their survival was for us. In the quiet of that kitchen, with the hum of the refrigerator as my only witness, I made a choice. It wasn't even a choice, really. It was a duty. I stood up, walked to the trash can, and with one clean, decisive motion, I tore the acceptance letter in half, and then in half again. The sound was nothing, just a soft rip, but it was the sound of a door slamming shut on a whole universe. The next morning, I walked into my father's workshop. I picked up one of his hand planes, felt its familiar weight, and got to work. My hands learned a new trade. They traded the delicate dance of a paintbrush for the unyielding grip of a saw. They grew strong, tough, and capable. They built a business, paid off the debts, raised a brother, and sent a son to college. Back in the attic, the dust settled around me. I touched the face of the girl in the portrait. She had no idea what was coming. She had no idea of the strength she possessed. The betrayal of my son and brother didn't just feel like an attack on me. The 5-year-old woman they saw as a fading nuisance. It was a desecration of the sacrifice of that 19-year-old girl. I didn't just give up an art career. I gave it up for them. A cold fire began to burn in my chest, melting away the shock and doubt. The memory hadn't weakened me. It had reminded me. It reminded me of the girl who made an impossible choice and never looked back. The girl who stared down bankruptcy and built an empire out of sawdust and sheer will. They thought that girl was long gone. They thought they were dealing with a frail old woman who misplaces her keys. They had no idea. That girl was still here, and she was about to get back to work. That girl was still here, and she was about to get back to work. But the tools for this job wouldn't be saws and sanders. They would be patience, cunning, and the element of surprise. My son and his wife thought they were dealing with a woman in decline, a problem to be managed. That was their first mistake. An enemy you underestimate is an enemy you've already lost to. I stood up from the dusty floor of the attic, my knees cracking in protest, but my spine felt like steel. The ghost of that 19-year-old girl didn't make me feel sad. She made me feel dangerous. She reminded me that I had a history of making impossible choices. I was about to make another one. I knew their words assessment, Dr. Miller, were the key. But a suspicion, even one that settles in your bones, isn't proof. I needed to see their plan in black and white. I needed a blueprint of their betrayal. And I had a pretty good idea of where to find it. The next morning I picked up the phone. I took a few deep breaths, summoning the frail, slightly confused woman they wanted me to be. When Ethan answered, my voice was thin, a little shaky. "Ethan, honey, it's Mom. I'm so sorry to bother you, but I think I might have left my reading glasses in your car the other day. The silver ones my late husband gave me. I've looked everywhere." The lie came easily. Those glasses were safely tucked in my nightstand drawer. "Oh, okay, Mom. he said, a hint of impatience in his voice. "I'm swamped today, but I'll leave the car unlocked in the driveway tonight. You can swing by and grab them. Just don't forget, okay?" "Oh, I won't, sweetie. Thank you," I said, laying the gratitude on thick. The casualness of his offer told me everything. He saw no threat in me at all. Perfect. That night I drove into his neighborhood, a pristine suburban enclave where all the houses looked alike and the silence felt manufactured. I parked my old Ford pickup a block away, its slightly rusted fenders looking out of place among the Teslas and BMWs. I walked up the perfectly manicured lawn, the motion sensor lights flicking on and bathing me in a sterile white glare. I felt like a burglar in my own son's life. His black sedan was sitting in the driveway, just as he'd said. I pulled the handle. The soft click of the unlocked door was deafening in the quiet street. The interior smelled of new leather and the faint, sweet scent of Madison's perfume. A child's car seat was buckled in the back, a silent testament to the family I thought I knew. My hands, the hands they believed were growing frail and clumsy, moved with purpose. I checked the glove compartment, just insurance papers and old napkins. The side pockets held nothing but charging cables and loose change. Then I saw it, sitting on the passenger seat like a dark promise. His briefcase. A sleek, expensive leather thing that probably cost more than my first car. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. Everything I needed to know was likely inside that case. Taking it was a risk, a huge one. But not knowing was a bigger one. My mind raced. I reached into my purse and pulled out a cheap pair of drugstore reading glasses I'd bought that afternoon. I tossed them onto the passenger side floor, half hidden under the seat. My alibi. Then, with my heart in my throat, I grabbed the briefcase, closed the car door as softly as I could, and walked away, trying to look like a woman on a simple errand, not a mother about to uncover a conspiracy. Back in my truck, parked under the dim orange glow of a streetlight, I placed the briefcase on my lap. The weight of it felt immense. My hands, which could tame a block of unruly oak, trembled as I fumbled with the silver latches. They sprang open with a sharp snick. Inside, nestled among a laptop and some files, was a single crisp manila folder. There was no label, no name, just a small typed sticker on the tab that read, EV Transition. My own initials. My blood ran cold. I opened the folder. The first document was a letter, printed on the heavy bond paper of a doctor's letterhead, Dr. Alistair Miller, Geriatric Psychiatry. I scanned the page, my eyes catching on the cold clinical phrases that were a grotesque parody of my life. Patient presents with significant memory deficits and spatial disorientation, exhibits signs of sundowning and paranoia, frequently accusing family members of malice. Recommendation: a full cognitive assessment to determine eligibility for durable power of attorney. It was a work of fiction, a meticulously crafted assassination of my character, all designed to paint me as an unstable, paranoid old woman. Beneath it was the next layer of their treachery. A series of spreadsheets, printed in neat, unforgiving columns. My entire life, quantified and valued. Vance Cabinetry, asset liquidation value, $1.2 million. My home, the house I had raised my son in, was listed next to a cold market appraisal. My savings, my 401k, even my late husband's modest life insurance policy, it was all there, tallied up like spoils of war. But the final page was the one that truly broke me. It was a copy of the Articles of Incorporation for a new LLC, registered just 3 weeks ago. The name of the company was Pinnacle Holdings Group. The stated purpose on the document was to acquire and manage existing business assets for new development projects. The primary project listed was Ethan's failing luxury condo development, the one he called the Pinnacle. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. He wasn't just planning to take my money. He was going to gut my company, the legacy I had bled for, and use its bones to build his own monument. He was going to name his victory after my destruction. I sat there in the cab of my truck, the damning papers spread out on the seat beside me. There were no tears. The hurt from that Sunday dinner, the fear from my trip to the attic, it had all been burned away by the white-hot rage that now filled me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a clumsy attempt to help. This was a coup, a premeditated, cold-blooded plan to strip me of my life, my legacy, and my sanity. My hands moved with a new, steady purpose. I carefully placed each document back into the folder. I closed the briefcase, the latches clicking shut like the loading of a rifle. The loving mother who had driven to this house an hour ago was gone, replaced by someone else entirely. In her place sat a woman with a blueprint for a war, and my son had just handed me all the ammunition I would ever need. The loving mother who had driven to my son's house was gone. In her place sat a woman with a blueprint for a war, and my son had just handed me all the ammunition I would ever need. But this war wouldn't be fought with raised voices and angry confrontations. That's what they expected. That's what they were prepared for. No, my battlefield would be quiet. It would be my own home, my own mind. My victory would come not from fighting the character they had written for me, but by becoming her. If they wanted a frail, confused old woman, then that's exactly what I would give them. The first thing I did the next morning was go online and order 3 of the smallest cameras I could find. When they arrived, I felt a strange thrill, the kind a soldier must feel when they clean their rifle for the first time. I placed the first one on my office desk, hiding it in a small ceramic birdhouse my granddaughter had made for me years ago. Its single, dark eye, once a simple hole for a tiny bird, was now my witness, my own personal surveillance state. With the stage set, it was time for the performance to begin. I picked up the phone and dialed Madison. I let it ring a few times, then spoke, injecting a wavering, reedy quality into my voice that I didn't know I could produce. "Maddie, dear," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "It's me. I'm at the Trader Joe's on Main Street, and it's all so loud. I can't seem to find the thing for the salad, the crunchy bits." "Croutons, Eleanor?" she asked, her voice heavy with a long-suffering sigh. "Yes, that's it. There are so many kinds, I don't know which one to get." I wasn't at Trader Joe's, of course. I was sitting in my own quiet living room. But I could picture it perfectly. The cheerful chaos, the employees in their bright Hawaiian shirts, the overwhelming wall of choices in every aisle. It was the perfect backdrop for my first public episode. "Stay right there," Madison said, the sound of her car keys jingling through the phone. "Don't move. I'll be there in 10 minutes. I hung up, took a deep breath, and drove to the store. I found the salad dressing aisle and stood there, clutching my shopping cart, and emptied my mind. I fixed a blank, slightly lost expression on my face and waited. When Madison bustled in, she saw exactly what she expected to see, a confused old woman, overwhelmed by the modern world. "Oh, you poor thing," she said, her voice loud enough for the other shoppers to hear. She took my arm in a grip that was surprisingly strong, less of a comfort and more of an escort. "It's okay, I'm here now. Let's just get what you need and get you home." She steered me through the aisles like a child, her hand firmly on my elbow. I let my body go limp, letting her guide me. Inside, I was a block of ice. I could feel the pitying glances from other shoppers, and I could see the smug, martyred satisfaction on Madison's face. She was thriving in this role, the dutiful daughter-in-law caring for her declining mother-in-law. My hands, the ones that could wrestle a slab of walnut into submission, gripped the handle of the shopping cart. My knuckles were white, not from weakness, but from the sheer force of will it took not to react, not to speak, not to give the game away. Back at my house, she insisted on putting the groceries away, clucking her tongue at the state of my pantry. Then she led me to my office, her arm still linked with mine. This was it, the moment I had been preparing for. "Eleanor," she said, her voice gentle but firm, like a nurse speaking to a difficult patient. "We need to talk about your bills. After what happened today, I really don't think you should be managing your finances alone anymore. It's too much for you." I looked at her with wide, innocent eyes. "But I've always paid my own bills." "I know, sweetie, and you've done a wonderful job. But things are different now. Let me just help you get organized. We can do it together." She sat me down at my desk, directly in the line of sight of the little birdhouse. She pulled up my online banking portal on the computer screen. I watched as the woman who was plotting to steal my entire life's work now prepared to lecture me on fiscal responsibility. The irony was so thick, I could have choked on it. "Okay, so this is the login page," she said, pointing to the screen and speaking slowly, as if I'd never seen a computer before. "You just type your username and password in these little boxes." I played my part. I let my strong, capable hands tremble as they hovered over the keyboard. I pecked at the letters, deliberately making typos. "Oh dear, I can't seem to remember the password. Is it Ethan's birthday?" "No, Eleanor. "We went over this," she said, her patience wearing thin. She brushed my hands away from the keyboard. "Just let me do it." I recited my password for her, and she typed it in. The screen flashed, and there it was. The sum total of my liquid assets, the numbers glowing on the screen like a treasure map. I watched her eyes, saw the flicker of greed, the quick, hungry glance she took before composing her face back into a mask of serene helpfulness. For the next hour, I sat there as she clicked through my accounts, paying my electric bill, my water bill, all the while keeping up a running commentary of condescending instructions. Inside, I was a hawk. I was cataloging every patronizing word, every smug smile, every moment she thought she was cementing her control. I felt a strange, chilling sense of detachment, as if I were watching a movie of my own life. It was humiliating, it was infuriating, and it was working perfectly. When she was finished, she logged out and patted my shoulder. "See? All done. Don't you worry your pretty little head about any of this anymore. I'll take care of it from now on." I looked up at her and gave her a weak, grateful smile. "Thank you, Maddie. You're such a good girl." She left a few minutes later, humming to herself. I waited until I heard her car pull out of the driveway before I let the smile drop from my face. I walked to the desk and looked at the little ceramic birdhouse. My silent witness. They thought they were building a case against my sanity. They had no idea I was building a case against their freedom. The performance had begun. They had taken the bait, hook, line, and sinker. And I was just getting started. The performance had begun. They had taken the bait, hook, line, and sinker. And I was just getting started. I had assumed naively that their plan would move slowly, cautiously. I was wrong. The moment they truly believed I was losing my grip, the floodgates opened. It was as if my perceived weakness gave them permission to let their own ugliest parts run free. The vultures, no longer content to wait for a natural end, began to circle in earnest. Their first move was to bring in the architect of my supposed demise, Dr. Miller. Ethan and Madison brought him to the house one afternoon under the guise of a friendly house call. He wasn't the monster I had imagined. He was worse. He was charming, with a kind smile and a soothing voice that made my skin crawl. He sat across from me in my own living room and began the gentle process of dismantling my sanity. "Eleanor," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "Ethan tells me you've been having a few more senior moments lately. Do we often forget where we put things?" I looked at my hands, resting in my lap. I forced a slight tremble into them. "Sometimes. The keys." "Of course," he nodded, making a note on a pad. "And are we finding it a little harder to keep track of the days? Sometimes feeling a bit adrift?" Madison, hovering by his shoulder like a vulture in training, chimed in. "She asked me if it was Tuesday on a Thursday last week, doctor, and she's been getting agitated in the evenings. We're very concerned about sundowning." I had done no such thing, but I just looked down at my hands, playing the part of a woman trying to grasp a memory that wasn't there. Inside, I was a furnace of silent rage. This man, with his leading questions and pre-drawn conclusions, was weaving a narrative with threads provided by my son. He was a hired gun, brought in to medically validate a lie. The entire 15-minute consultation was a masterclass in gaslighting. When he left, he patted my hand and told Ethan he would be in touch to schedule a more formal assessment. The trap was closing right on schedule. With the medical justification underway, Madison began the next phase of the invasion. A few days later, she showed up at my door with an armful of paint swatches and fabric samples. I was sitting in my favorite armchair by the window, reading a book. She breezed past me without so much as a hello. "The lighting in here is just terrible for a showing," she announced to the empty room. She began holding up paint swatches to the wall, muttering to herself, "We need to neutralize everything. Benjamin Moore Revere Pewter, or maybe Agreeable Gray." She moved through my living room like she already owned it. Her manicured fingers, so different from my own, trailed over the surfaces of furniture that I had known my entire adult life. She stopped at the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that flanked the fireplace. "These have to go," she said, turning to look at me as if just remembering I was there. "They're so dark and heavy. It makes the whole room feel dated. We need to open up the space for staging." I looked at the bookshelves. I looked at my hands. My hands had built those shelves 30 years ago from solid oak that I had picked out myself at the lumber yard. My hands had sanded them, stained them, and installed them. They held my books, my photo albums, my history. To her, they were just a design flaw, an obstacle on the way to a commission. I didn't say a word. I just turned a page in my book, the crisp sound of the paper, a tiny act of defiance in a room that was no longer my own. The final act of that brutal week came on a Friday. Gary, my brother, came over, looking agitated and smelling of stale sweat. He walked right past me and pulled Ethan, who had just arrived, into the kitchen. They must have thought I was too deaf or too demented to hear them. They were wrong. "When is this happening?" Gary's voice was a harsh whisper. "Brenda's on my back about the mortgage. The bank isn't going to wait forever." "It takes time, Gary. Be patient," Ethan hissed back. "The assessment has to be official. We have to do this by the book so it's ironclad." "And my cut?" Gary pressed, his voice tight with desperation. "We're still agreed on 20% of the business assets, right? That was the deal for me backing your play." "We'll talk about the numbers later. Not here." Madison's sharp voice cut through their argument as she joined them. "The real problem isn't the numbers. It's what to do with her afterwards. We can't have her living here while we're trying to sell. It's impossible." A cold silence fell over the kitchen. I held my breath, waiting. "There's that place out on Route 9, Ethan said finally, his voice low. "Golden Pastures. It's state-funded. It's affordable." "God, no," Madison scoffed. "Have you seen the reviews for that place? It's a horror show. My mother's friend put her husband there, and it was a nightmare. We can't have people thinking we dumped her in a place like that. It would look terrible for us." "So what do you suggest, Maddie?" Gary asked. "The private places cost a fortune. That's money that comes out of our share. We use her long-term care insurance for the first year at a decent place, like the Willows," she said, her voice all business. "That gives us time to liquidate everything, get our money, and then we can reevaluate. Maybe the state place will be the only option left by then." I sat in my armchair, the book heavy in my lap, its words now just meaningless black squiggles on a white page. My own family, 10 feet away, was debating the cost and social implications of my cage. They were talking about me as if I were a piece of aging, inconvenient furniture they needed to dispose of. They weren't just planning to take my home and my business. They were planning to take my entire life and lock it away in a place where I would be forgotten. They had no idea the woman they were talking about was listening. They had no idea she was judging. And they had no idea she was preparing to make them pay for every single merciless word. They were debating the cost of my cage while I sat right there. They had no idea the person they were talking about was listening, judging, and preparing to make them pay for every single word. While they were busy drawing up their battle plans for my destruction, I was quietly building my arsenal. They thought they were the hunters. They had forgotten that the most dangerous creature in the woods is the one who knows the terrain better than anyone else. And this was my forest. I couldn't do it alone. A good craftswoman knows when to call in a specialist. My first and only call was to Carol. Carol had been my best friend for 40 years. She was a retired forensic accountant who had spent her career sniffing out corporate fraud for the FBI. She was sharper than a freshly honed chisel and had a healthy disrespect for anyone who thought they could get away with something. I called her for an emergency poker night, our old code for when one of us was in real trouble. She arrived at my back door after dark, a bottle of bourbon in one hand and a suspicious look on her face. We sat at my large oak kitchen table, the same one where I'd hosted decades of family dinners. This time, however, it was a war room. I laid out the contents of the folder I'd found in Ethan's briefcase. I played the audio from the hidden camera, the recording of their cold-blooded debate about my future. Carol listened without saying a word, her face a stony mask. She read every document, her finger tracing the numbers on the financial spreadsheets. When the audio finished, she didn't offer sympathy. She didn't say, "I'm so sorry." She poured 2 fingers of bourbon into a pair of glasses, pushed one towards me and said, "All right, let's burn them to the ground." For the next 2 weeks, my house became a covert operations center. By day, I was the declining matriarch, fumbling with my keys and staring blankly at the television. But by night, my home came alive. Carol and I worked at the kitchen table, surrounded by laptops and legal documents. The first order of business was defense. "They're going for a durable power of attorney based on a fraudulent medical assessment," Carol said, her voice cutting through the quiet of the house. "We need to make sure that even if they get it, it's worthless. We build a fortress, Elle, an ironclad, irrevocable trust. We move every significant asset into it. The business, the house, your retirement accounts, everything. A few days later, I was sitting in a lawyer's office, a place that smelled of old books and money. A mountain of paperwork sat in front of me. I picked up the pen, and I looked at my hand. This hand, which had learned to perform a convincing tremble for my son, was now perfectly steady. My signature on each page was firm and clear. With every stroke of the pen, I could feel another brick being laid in my fortress. I was signing my own declaration of financial independence, not from the world, but from my own family. They could get power of attorney over Eleanor Vance, the confused old woman. But that woman, for all intents and purposes, would be broke. Next came intelligence. On Carol's recommendation, I hired a private investigator, a quiet, unassuming man named Frank who looked more like a librarian than a detective. His job was simple: dig into Ethan's finances. I needed to know the truth behind the spreadsheets. I needed to know exactly how desperate my son was. While Frank worked, I installed the other 2 cameras, one in the living room and one in the hallway, both with audio. I was no longer just collecting evidence of their plot. I was creating a complete, high-definition record of their conspiracy. A week later, Frank delivered his report. It was worse than I imagined. Ethan wasn't just in debt, he was drowning in it. He had leveraged everything on this pinnacle condo project, and a series of bad investments and cut corners had left him on the verge of total ruin. The primary lien holder on the project was a ruthless vulture fund out of Chicago, and they were days away from foreclosing and taking everything. The report explained his desperation. He didn't just want my money for a bigger house, he needed it to avoid personal and professional annihilation. That night, Carol and I sat with the PI's report spread out on the table. This was the moment the game changed. "Defense isn't enough," I said, the bourbon warming my throat. "They're coming for my life's work with a wrecking ball. I'm not going to just stand behind a wall and wait for it to crumble." Carol looked at me, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. "What do you have in mind?" "They want to use my assets to save his project?" I said. "Fine. Let's get there first." The plan was audacious, the kind of high-stakes maneuver that made my heart pound with a terrifying, exhilarating rhythm. The next day, guided by Carol's lawyer, we established a new limited liability company, a shell corporation with an anonymous registration. When it came time to choose a name, I didn't hesitate. I thought of the ghost in my attic, the 19-year-old girl with her sketchbook and her dreams. I thought of the letter I had torn in half. I named it Pratt Holdings. My stolen future was about to become the instrument of my revenge. The final step was the most nerve-wracking. Following Carol's precise instructions, I executed a series of wire transfers, moving a substantial portion of my now protected savings into the new Pratt Holdings account. Then, through a series of legal cutouts, our lawyer made an offer to the Chicago Vulture Fund. We offered to buy Ethan's debt from them, in full, for 10 cents on the dollar. To them, it was a failing investment they were happy to unload before it went completely bankrupt. They accepted without a second thought. I'll never forget the feeling of hitting confirm on that final wire transfer. My hand, steady as a rock, clicked the mouse. The screen flashed, transaction complete. Just like that, I owned my son's dream. I was his bank, his creditor, the anonymous, faceless entity that held the power of his financial life and death in my hands. He was so busy planning how to rob his helpless mother that he never once thought to check who was buying the rope for his own hanging. He wanted my legacy to fund his future. He had no idea I had just bought it. He wanted my legacy to fund his future. He had no idea I had just bought it. The knowledge of that secret power was a cold, hard stone in my gut. For the next week, I lived in a state of surreal duality. In the quiet of the night, I was a creditor, a strategist, the unseen force that now controlled my son's entire financial destiny. But by day, I was his pawn, a doddering old woman moving a little slower, a little more vaguely as I waited for his final move. I knew it was coming. The power of attorney was the endgame, the legal weapon they needed to pull off their heist. Owning his debt was my shield. Letting him get that signature was the bait. The call came on a Tuesday morning. It was Ethan, his voice unnaturally solemn, like a bad actor in a hospital drama. "Mom," he said, a weighty pause hanging in the air. Madison and I are coming over this afternoon. Our lawyer, Mr. Davies, is going to join us. There are just a few papers we need to go over to make things easier for you." "Papers?" I asked, my voice a practiced, breathy whisper. "Just formalities, Mom, to make sure you're taken care of. We'll be there around 2. He hung up before I could respond. I stood in my silent kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear. This was it, the final act of the performance. I wasn't preparing for a legal meeting. I was getting into costume for the most important role of my life. They arrived precisely at 2. Ethan, Madison, a slick-looking lawyer in an expensive suit, and a young, nervous-looking notary public who seemed to have been pulled in from the street. They arranged themselves around my large oak dining table, the one where I'd once helped a little boy with his homework. Now, that same boy was here to legally erase me. Ethan and Madison were a perfect picture of filial devotion. Madison helped me into my chair, her touch overly gentle, her smile achingly fake. Ethan poured me a glass of water, his movements slow and deliberate, a pantomime of care for the benefit of the notary. The lawyer, Mr. Davies, cleared his throat and slid a thick stack of documents across the polished surface of the table. "Now, Eleanor," he began, his voice smooth and patronizing. "This is what we call a durable power of attorney. It's a very common document. It simply allows Ethan to help you with some of the bigger decisions, to manage your accounts and properties, so you don't have to worry about a thing." I stared at the papers, a dense forest of legal jargon I was supposed to be too senile to navigate. I could feel Madison's barely suppressed excitement, a nervous energy coming off her in waves. I could see the notary shifting uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting between me and Ethan. He knew on some level that this felt wrong. I looked up from the papers, letting my eyes look foggy and unfocused. I turned to my son. "What is this for again, sweetie? My memory is it's like a leaky faucet today." Ethan reached across the table and placed his hand on mine. His skin was warm, his touch gentle. It was the most profound lie I had ever felt. "It's to make sure we can take care of you, Mom," he said, his voice thick with false emotion. "It's so you don't have to worry about anything ever again. We'll handle everything." "Everything." He said the word with such finality. Mr. Davies slid the final page and a heavy, expensive fountain pen in front of me. "If you'll just sign on the dotted line, Eleanor." I picked up the pen. I let my hand, the hand that could guide a router with millimeter precision, the hand that had just signed the documents that made me the master of his fate, begin to tremble. I made a show of trying to grip the pen, fumbling with it until Ethan let out a soft, pitying sigh. "Here, Mom, let me help," he said. He moved his chair closer, his arms circling around my shoulder. He placed his hand over mine, his fingers closing around my own, guiding the pen to the paper. And in that moment, the world went silent. All I could feel was the pressure of his hand on mine. This was the hand I had held when he took his first steps. The hand I had bandaged after he fell off his bike. The hand that had gripped mine at his father's funeral. Now, it was a cage, a tool of control, forcing my own hand to sign away my life. My internal monologue was a roar of ice and fire. "You feel this, Ethan?" I thought. "You feel this control? This is what you think power is. But the hand you are guiding right now owns every brick of the building you are trying to save. The hand you think is so frail could crush you without ever making a fist." I let him guide my signature. It came out as a spidery, wavering scrawl, the signature of a ghost, of the feeble-minded woman I was pretending to be. It looked nothing like my own. The notary, seeing his cue, leaned forward and stamped the document with a loud, percussive thud that seemed to echo in the silent room. It was done. A long, slow breath escaped from Ethan's lungs. He had been holding it in, I realized, the breath of a man who had just pulled off the heist of a lifetime. He and Madison exchanged a look over the top of my head, a fleeting, triumphant glance that was gone in an instant. It was the most honest communication I had seen between them in years. They left quickly after that, all smiles and pats on the shoulder. "You get some rest now, Mom," Ethan said at the door. "You've had a big day." I sat alone at my dining table for a long time, staring at the indentation my new, false signature had left on the leather blotter. They thought they had won. They thought they had locked me in a cage and thrown away the key. They had no idea I had just watched them walk, willingly and with great satisfaction, into a cage of my own design. The final piece of the trap had been laid. All that was left was to invite the guests to the execution. The final piece of the trap had been laid. All that was left was to invite the guests to the execution. And I knew, with the chilling certainty of a prophet, that the executioner would be the one to send out his own invitations. For a week, an unnerving quiet settled over my life. The phone calls from Ethan and Madison stopped. Their visits ceased. In their minds, I was a done deal, a problem that had been solved and filed away. They left me alone with my declining mind, never imagining that in the silence, I was doing what I did best. I was building. I wasn't working with wood. I was working with strategy. Every night, Carol came over, and we went over the plan until it was sanded smooth, with no rough edges, no room for error. We were two old women, sitting at a kitchen table, quietly plotting the complete and total annihilation of a multi-million-dollar real estate project. I was an actress in the wings, waiting for my cue. It arrived the following Tuesday, delivered by the mail carrier in a crisp blue uniform. I saw it through the window, a single, oversized envelope standing out from the usual stack of bills and junk mail. It was thick and creamy white, looking ridiculously out of place in my simple metal mailbox. I walked out to get it, and the moment my fingers touched the heavy cardstock, I knew. I brought it inside and sat down at my dining table, the site of my final betrayal. I ran my thumb over the front. There was no return address, only a lavish, embossed letter P pressed into the paper. My hands, calloused and practical, felt clumsy holding something so self-consciously elegant. It felt like holding a lie. I slid my finger under the flap and broke the seal. Inside was another envelope, this one made of a delicate, semi-transparent vellum, sealed with a circle of real wax, again stamped with that arrogant P. I cracked the wax seal and pulled out the invitation itself. The cardstock was at least a quarter-inch thick, with shimmering gold leaf edging that glittered under the light. The lettering was a swirling, ornate script, also in gold. Ethan and Madison Vance, it read, request the pleasure of your company at the grand unveiling of the Pinnacle, a new vision for luxury living. Beneath it were the details, each one a testament to their soaring hubris, a black tie affair, Saturday the 25th of October. Cocktails, hors d'oeuvre, and a live string quartet, valet parking provided. It was the kind of ostentatious event that people in my world, the world of hard work and tangible results, usually made fun of. To them, it was clearly the pinnacle of their existence. But the real gut punch was on the back. I turned the card over. There, under a small, elegantly printed heading, was a tribute. The heading read, A Legacy of Vision. My eyes scanned the words, each one a perfectly crafted poisonous dart. This project would not have been possible, it began, without the lifelong support and unwavering belief of Eleanor Vance. A matriarch of unparalleled strength and foresight, her dedication to family and community has been the bedrock upon which this dream was built. The Pinnacle is not just a building, it is the culmination of her family's enduring legacy. I had to put the invitation down on the table. A dry, humorless laugh escaped my lips. Unwavering belief? Foresight? They had twisted my life's sacrifice into a branding opportunity. They were using my name, the good name I had spent 45 years building in this community, as a stamp of approval on their crime. Just as I was rereading the sickening tribute, my phone rang. It was Ethan. The solemn, funereal tone he'd used for weeks was gone, replaced by a giddy, breathless excitement. He was flying high. "Mom, did you get it? Did you get the invitation?" "It just arrived, sweetie," I said, my voice soft and frail. "Isn't it incredible? The response has been amazing. The mayor is coming, we've got a crew from Channel 4 News, all the big investors will be there. This is it, Mom. This is the moment everything changes for us." "That's wonderful, dear," I whispered. "And listen," he said, his voice dropping into a tone of magnanimous affection. "I want you there. Front and center, on my arm, you're my guest of honor. I'm going to give a speech, and I'm going to talk all about you, about everything you've done for me. There won't be a dry eye in the house." The lamb not just led to the slaughter, but asked to be the guest of honor at the butcher's feast. The sheer, blinding arrogance of it was almost beautiful in its purity. He wanted to parade me around as a symbol of his wholesome family man success, all while he was secretly liquidating my life to pay for the catering. "I'd be honored, Ethan," I said. "Great, I'll have a car pick you up at 7. Wear something nice, Mom. This is the biggest night of our lives." "Oh." He hung up, leaving me in the silence of my house, the golden invitation gleaming on the table. That night, I went into my closet. I pushed past the sensible beige cardigans and practical blouses I had lived in for years. At the very back, protected in a plastic garment bag, was a dress I hadn't worn in over a decade. It was a deep, crimson red, the color of a fine wine or fresh blood. I had bought it for my 30th wedding anniversary, but my husband had passed away 2 months before we could celebrate. I had never had the heart to wear it. I unzipped the bag and held the dress up in front of the full-length mirror. The woman in the reflection looked tired, but as I held the vibrant red silk against my body, I could see a flicker of something else in her eyes. A glint of steel, a promise. This dress wasn't for a party. It was my battle armor. I wasn't going to that gala as a frail old woman or as a guest of honor. I was going as a creditor. I was going as a judge. And I was going as the sole rightful owner of my own legacy. They had sent an invitation to a party, but I was RSVPing to a reckoning. They had sent an invitation to a party, but I was RSVPing to a reckoning. The Blacktown car that Ethan had sent pulled up to a valet stand under a glittering marquee that read The Pinnacle. The night air was cool, but the scene was a fever dream of flashing camera bulbs and the murmur of 100 conversations. As the driver opened my door, I felt like I was stepping onto a movie set. A red carpet, velvet ropes, and a sea of people in tuxedos and sequin dresses. It was a world built on illusion, which made it the perfect stage for the truth. Ethan was waiting for me just inside the lobby, his face flushed with excitement and pride. He was radiant, a golden boy on the verge of his coronation. He rushed over and took my arm, and I immediately slumped into my role, leaning on him as if I couldn't stand on my own. "Mom, you look incredible," he said, his voice booming. "That color is stunning on you." "Oh." I wore my crimson dress, a slash of defiant color in a sea of polite black and silver. I just gave him a weak, fluttering smile. "It's an old thing." "You're the guest of honor, you can't be old," he laughed, then began to steer me into the main ballroom. "Come on, there are so many people I want you to meet." For the next hour, he paraded me around the room like his prize racehorse. I was his prop, the living symbol of his wholesome, family-first success story. He introduced me to investors with predatory smiles, to a city councilman with a politician's empty handshake, and to the mayor herself. To each of them, he told a slightly different version of the same lie. "This is my mother, Eleanor. She's the reason we're all here tonight. My rock, my inspiration." I played my part. I smiled vaguely. I let my eyes seem distant and unfocused. I allowed him to speak for me. All the while, I was a silent recording device, noting the greedy glint in the investor's eyes, the way Madison, glittering in a silver dress, laughed a little too loudly at the mayor's bad jokes. She was in her element, the queen of this gilded cage, never suspecting the bars were about to snap shut. Finally, the string quartet quieted, and the lights dimmed. A single brilliant spotlight hit the small stage at the front of the room. Ethan squeezed my arm. "It's time," he whispered, and led me through the crowd. He bounded onto the stage, a natural performer. He tapped the microphone, and a hush fell over the ballroom. He began his speech, his voice thick with a practiced, sentimental warmth that made my stomach turn. He talked about dreams, about vision, about building a future for the city. And then, he turned his focus to me. "But the foundation of this building isn't just concrete and steel," he said, his eyes shining as he looked at me. "It's the love and sacrifice of my mother, Eleanor Vance. She worked her fingers to the bone to give me a life she never had. She is the epitome of the American dream, and her unwavering belief in me is the wind that has always been in my sails. Mom, this is all for you." The room erupted in applause. People were dabbing their eyes. It was a beautiful performance, a masterpiece of fiction. Ethan beamed, then turned and held out his hand to me. "And now I'd like my mother, my inspiration, to say a few words." He helped me up the 2 short steps to the stage. The spotlight was blinding. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me. He handed me the heavy, cool microphone. This was it, the moment of truth. I brought the microphone to my lips, my hand performing a perfect, convincing tremble. I looked out at the sea of expectant faces. I tapped the mic, and a soft thud echoed through the speakers. A few people in the front row smiled with gentle pity. "Hello," I whispered, my voice reedy and thin. I paused, looking lost. I could feel Ethan's encouraging presence beside me, the proud son showing off his frail, sweet mother. Then, I took a deep, silent breath. I straightened my back. My hand, the one that had signed away my life, closed around the microphone with the unshakable grip of a woodworker. When I spoke again, my voice wasn't a whisper. It was clear, it was strong, and it was amplified to fill every corner of that silent, cavernous room. "Thank you, Ethan," I said, my new voice cutting through the air like a blade. "You talked about family legacy. It's an important subject. So tonight, instead of just talking about it, I thought I would show you the real legacy my son was planning for me." A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. I saw Ethan's smile falter. I ignored him and nodded to a man in a black polo shirt standing by the soundboard in the back of the room. It was Carol's AV tech. The massive screens behind the stage, which had been displaying a rotating gallery of glamorous condominium interiors, flickered and went black. Then, a new image appeared. It was the view from the little ceramic birdhouse on my desk. The audio crackled to life, and Madison's voice, sharp and condescending, filled the ballroom. "Okay, so this is the login page," her recorded voice explained. "You just type your username and password in these little boxes." The crowd gasped. I watched my son's face. The color drained from it, his confident smile collapsing into a mask of pure, dawning horror. The recording continued. The audience heard everything. They heard my brother Gary, his voice a tense whisper demanding his 20% cut. They heard Madison scoffing at the idea of a state-run nursing home because it would look terrible for us. And finally, they heard my son's voice, low and practical, as he debated the most cost-effective way to dispose of his mother. The video ended, the screens went black. For 5 long seconds there was an absolute profound silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. A woman in the front row dropped her champagne flute, and the sound of it shattering on the marble floor was like a gunshot. In that crushing silence, I was still on the stage, holding the microphone, looking directly at my son. In his eyes, I watched as the man he had pretended to be all night died a swift, violent death. And I watched as the monster he truly was finally born into the light. In that crushing silence, I looked at my son's face, watching as the man he pretended to be died, and the monster he truly was finally born into the light. The silence stretched for an eternity, a black hole that sucked all the air and music and laughter out of the room. Then, a single voice, sharp as shattering glass, broke the spell. "Vance!" The voice belonged to a bulldog of a man in the front row, a major investor named Harrington. He was on his feet, his face a mask of purple rage, stabbing a finger towards the stage. "You used your own mother as a prop for a lie. You're finished. Harrington Capital is out. Effective immediately. You'll be hearing from our lawyers." That one shout was all it took. The dam broke. The ballroom, which moments before had been a sea of polite applause, erupted into a cacophony of outrage. The confused murmurings became a roar of angry questions. The news cameras, which had been dutifully capturing a local success story, swarmed forward, their flashes now the blinding, predatory strobes of a feeding frenzy. From my vantage point on the stage, I watched the house of cards my son had built collapse in on itself in real time. I saw the mayor, who had been shaking Ethan's hand an hour ago, turn his back and slip out a side exit, his security detail clearing a path. I watched as Madison, frozen in a rictus of horror, was suddenly, visibly, alone. Her circle of glittering socialite friends seemed to melt away from her, physically taking steps back, creating a quarantine zone around her, as if her failure were contagious. Her social life, the thing she valued above all else, had just been publicly executed. Ethan, panicked, grabbed the microphone at the podium. "Wait!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "It's a lie! It's all a lie! She's not well!" She gets confused. "Can't you see?" But his words were swallowed by the noise. No one was listening. He was trying to use the very lie he had created as a shield, but it was a shield made of smoke. He had spent weeks convincing people I was losing my mind, and now, at the one moment he needed me to seem crazy, I had never appeared more sane. I lowered the microphone from my lips, my hand, finally, perfectly steady. My work on this stage was done. I walked down the steps, the crimson of my dress, a moving target in the chaos, and the crowd parted for me as if I were a ghost. They stared at me with a mixture of awe, pity, and fear. Ethan and Madison, seeing their escape route cut off by a wall of reporters, finally gave up and made a desperate push for the main doors. But their path was blocked. Standing there, calm as a statue in the middle of a hurricane, was my friend Carol. Beside her stood a tall man in a dark, impeccable suit, holding a leather satchel. "Mr. Vance," Carol said, her voice cutting cleanly through the din. Ethan stopped, his face a mess of sweat and disbelief. "This is Mr. Albright. I'm Carol Brewster, a representative for Pratt Holdings." Ethan stared at her blankly, his mind clearly unable to process this new information. Pratt Holdings? Who the hell is Pratt Holdings? He looked past her, his desperate eyes searching for me as I approached. I stopped a few feet away. I said, my voice quiet, but it carried. Carol didn't miss a beat. She nodded to the lawyer, who opened his satchel. "Pratt Holdings, Mr. Vance, is the primary lien holder on this property and all its associated assets," she continued, her tone crisp and professional. "As of 3 days ago, you were in default on several covenants of your loan. As of this moment, we are exercising our right to foreclose." Mr. Albright stepped forward and handed Ethan a thick sheaf of legal documents. "You're being served, Mr. Vance," the lawyer said. "You have 48 hours to vacate the premises. Everything here now belongs to our client." Ethan looked down at the papers in his hand, then back up at me. The rage, the panic, the denial, it all just vanished from his face, replaced by a look of profound, sickening comprehension. He wasn't just losing the building. He was realizing he had been outmaneuvered from the very beginning. His mind, so quick to calculate asset values and plot takeovers, was finally putting the pieces together. "Pratt," he whispered, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "Pratt Holdings." His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I think he truly saw me. Not as a mother, not as a resource, not as an obstacle. He saw the 19-year-old girl in the attic. He saw the torn letter. He saw the choice I had made. The anger and fight drained out of him, leaving behind the hollowed-out shell of a man who finally understood the scale of his own monstrosity. "The paintings," he breathed, the words barely audible. "In the attic, you gave up the paintings." It wasn't an apology. It was too late for that. It was a confession. An acknowledgement of the original sin, the sacrifice he had never even bothered to see, the dream he had unknowingly trampled under the weight of his own greed. I gave him a single, small, sad nod. That was all the answer he was ever going to get. I turned my back on him then. I turned my back on the wreckage of his life, on Madison, who was now openly sobbing, her mascara running in black rivers down her face. I turned my back on the flashbulbs and the shouting reporters. Carol put a steadying hand on my arm, and together, we walked towards the doors. I didn't look back. The vultures were feasting, and the reckoning was complete. The reckoning was complete. Walking out of that glittering ballroom was like stepping out of a burning building into the cool, clean night air. Behind me was a bonfire of greed and ambition, a cacophony of shouting reporters and shattered reputations. Ahead of me was silence. For the first time in months, my mind was quiet. The war was over. I had won. In the weeks that followed, the story was everywhere. It was a local media sensation, a juicy tale of high society drama and family betrayal. I didn't watch the news or read the papers. I didn't need to. My part in their story was over. I heard through the grapevine that Ethan, Madison, and my brother Gary were facing a mountain of legal trouble, fraud, conspiracy, elder abuse. The investors, led by Mr. Boat Harrington, came after them with everything they had. They lost the house, the cars, the friends. They lost the life they had been so willing to kill for. As for the Pinnacle, the building that had started it all, it was now legally mine, under the ownership of Pratt Holdings. I went to see it once. I stood across the street and looked up at the towering monument to my son's greed, its glass windows reflecting the empty sky. There was no triumph in it for me. It was built on a rotten foundation, and I wanted no part of it. I had Carol and her lawyers sell it. The entire profit from the sale was used to establish a permanent scholarship fund at the local community college for young people, especially young women, entering the skilled trades. If my money had been the poison, I was determined to use it as the antidote. That was 6 months ago. My life today is unrecognizable, and yet it is more truly my own than it has ever been. The first thing I did was change the sign outside my workshop. The old, faded Vance cabinetry came down. In its place now is a new sign, carved from a beautiful piece of curly maple. It reads, Vance & Co. The "& Co. is my favorite part. It stands for Carol. It stands for my new friends. And it stands for Maya. Maya is my apprentice. She's 20 years old, with bright, curious eyes and a hunger to learn. She's the first recipient of the scholarship fund. Today, sunlight is streaming through the large workshop windows, illuminating the dancing dust motes that I once called my perfume. The air smells of fresh-cut cherry wood. I'm standing behind Maya at the workbench, my hands covering hers, guiding them as she learns the delicate art of carving a dovetail joint. Her hands are young and smooth, mine are old and scarred. But as I guide her, I feel a connection, a transfer of knowledge that is more real and more lasting than any financial inheritance. This, I realize, is a true legacy. Not a pile of money you leave behind, but a skill you pass along, a passion you ignite in someone else. Easy does it, I tell her, my voice gentle. Don't force the chisel. Let the wood tell you where it wants to go. She makes a perfect cut, and a slow smile spreads across her face. It's the same look of pure, unadulterated pride I used to see in my own reflection in the workshop window years ago. It's a look I never once saw on my son's face. They tried to take everything from me. They tried to take my business, my home, my sanity. They used my hands, my life's work, as collateral in a game they were destined to lose. But the one thing they could never take was the skill within those hands. They could plot to sell the workshop, but they could never sell the knowledge that built it. That was mine and mine alone. I finally understand now. The 19-year-old girl in the attic with her canvases and her scholarships, I didn't fail her by tearing up that letter. Her strength wasn't in the future she gave up. It was in the impossible choice she made. Her courage wasn't in the art she might have created, but in the life she built with the tools she had. I didn't need to become that girl to be whole. I just needed to remember her spirit. They tried to write the final chapter of my story for me, but they forgot one crucial thing. My hands were still strong enough to hold the pen. So, let me ask you, if life tried to erase the pages you've written, would you have the courage to write a new ending? If my story resonated with you, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your support and your own stories of strength mean the world to me. And please, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about finding the power to reclaim your own narrative.